There's one place I'd like to start, and that is with the departure of Kevin De Bruyne. Now, we spoke last week, Stephen. You spoke about how you were hopeful that De Bruyne would sign a new contract at City, but obviously the decision now has been made for him to leave when his deal expires at the end of the season, bringing the curtain down on a glittering 10-year career at the Etihad Stadium. Now, we knew this day would eventually come, but what are your thoughts on the announcement? Do you think now is the right time for De Bruyne to leave, and how significant is his departure?
Yeah, it's devastating. He's probably my favorite ever footballer, to be honest. There are other different ones from different sides and all that kind of stuff. But as a Manchester City player, I know he's yeah. I mean, the nostalgia attaches me to people like Sean Wright Phillips and Clancy from when I was a kid and stuff. But Kevin De Bruyne, I think he's Manchester City's greatest ever player. I think he's a intensely unique footballer with a skill set that is so hard to replicate that. I don't think it's a surprise that if his body's caught with him a little bit and time's caught with him, that it's probably hard to do what he did because it was such an intensely physical skill set as well. Incredible vision, but such a freakish level of physical talent required to do it because De Bruyne he didn't just cross the ball well; it would bullet like passes or shots with intense accuracy and precision. And I think that requires you to be a physical beast, really. And I don't think De Bruyne, unfortunately, I think there are signs that that's starting to disappear. I can't really remember the last time that he did something that felt out of the ordinary for Manchester City, sadly. And he felt like usually he'd do that every game, even if he wasn't at his best. Still, I did want him to stay. I feel like his status in football, his leadership, his authority, just him being Kevin De Bruyne, there is still value of him being around the squad, especially if we're going to have a deeper squad next season. And Guardiola's talked an awful lot about, wanting a little bit just more players next year. And I felt for me, De Bruyne staying around would be a very sensible option. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. Annoyingly, it felt sort of symbolic yesterday that that he had such a poor game, and he did sadly after the announcement. I saw a stat saying it was the first time he'd failed to create a single chance in a Premier League game that he played 90 minutes in since 2018. So April 2018. So it'd been 7 years since he'd failed to create a single chance, and look, to have that game after this. I don't think they would ever enjoy it, Pep, Cheeky, and Soriano and Co. But they probably felt slightly justified, if that makes sense. It's like, see, we sort of know what we're on about. They won't enjoy it, they'll be devastated that it happened, but it sort of showed that maybe they're right because Kevin De Bruyne 3 years ago, 2 years ago, he wins that game on his own. And I'm not just exaggerating there. He plays a perfect cross. There's a couple of times where he could have crossed to Marmoush and he just couldn't make the pass. Where previously he puts it at the back post and Marmoush gets the tap in. Guaranteed because he was that good. And he couldn't do that. He couldn't do it you know, despite trying his best for 90 minutes. And I think it felt like, yeah, maybe they made the right call here because if you're going to have to be ruthless to start again, maybe you do need to let go of the biggest name in your squad and free up some wages and move on. I want him to stay. Don't get me wrong, but they've made the decision and we've got to sort of accept it really and move on.
Yeah, I mean, this season's been difficult for him and for all City players. And obviously, injury worries have been a problem for De Bruyne now recently. But, aside from that, he really has been a joy to watch at Man City. And you mentioned
Special.
there, yeah, he has been special. And you mentioned there about him being the greatest City player in terms of the Premier League. Where do you think he ranks among all Premier League players and Premier League midfielders? Is he the greatest?
I'm inherently biased, but at the same time, I try not to be. I'm old enough to watch Scholes, Gerrard, Lampard, and I think at his very best, Kevin De Bruyne had everything that they were all capable of. You think of like a Lampard, absurd goal scorer and striker of the ball. De Bruyne had that as well. Maybe not quite as frequently, but then he was much more creative than Frank Lampard ever was. You think about the vision of Paul Scholes. I think De Bruyne is a better passer. I think he's a better striker of the ball than. You think of the powerful driving runs of someone like Steven Gerrard. De Bruyne had that. An underrated part of his game was that how strong a ball carrier De Bruyne was, and this is not in the era of the mid 2000s and earlier where the physicality of the Premier League hadn't caught up an awful lot. Gerrard was a physical phenomenon, But everyone is now. Everyone's got players that can run and powerful, so it's harder to do it. But still, De Bruyne did it in this era. He was a leader, and also he did it against Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Arsenal, Liverpool, United in big games. De Bruyne did that. I truly think anything that they guys could do, he could do, and he did it consistently. And he was the best player in the best side. For me, he is. He's up there in the conversation with Henry. I know people won't accept that because there's an inherent. It feels this way in a City fan. There's an inherent sort of playing down of anything City accomplished because of the money and so on, and the allegations. And I think nostalgia sort of it wins people's hearts. But I don't think there's a single side in the history of the Premier League, or maybe even football to an extent, that it doesn't get better without the brilliance of Kevin De Bruyne. I truly think he's once in a lifetime level footballer that time will be so kind to. Incredibly hardworking, no nonsense, no fuss, puts his side on his shoulders always, capable of things with either foot that I didn't think were possible. The best player in the best side in the league for 10 years. And I think I saw Michael Richards saying, "Oh, he loved what David Silva did in Aguero because the team wasn't quite as good." And I saw Roy Keane of all people snap back and said, "It's actually more impressive to be the best player in a side full of world class players because it shows you are truly special." And he was, and I really believe that. I think he is the best player. I think he was the best player despite being surrounded by geniuses, which shows his level. An astonishing footballer, and you only have to ask footballers. You look at who you list. You ask Mo Salah who he wants to play with. He says Kevin De Bruyne. You ask, all these kids growing up these days, who's your idol? Kevin De Bruyne. I want to be like him. His legacy is going to be one of an all timer, and I think time will be very kind to him. Special footballer.
Yeah, exactly so. And in terms of the City now finding a replacement, I think some will argue maybe that City have three options in how to maybe go about it. One of those could be, of course, to splash the cash, to spend a huge sum, maybe in excess of £100 million on a player like Florian Wirtz at Bayer Leverkusen, who's been regularly linked with City. Another option maybe is to sign a slightly cheaper alternative, maybe someone in the 50 to £60 million bracket. I think, for example, you look at someone like Eberechi Eze at Palace, who's reported to have a £60 million release clause. So that could be something that clubs like City are tempted by. And then maybe another option is then for City to spend money elsewhere on the squad, but rely on someone else to step up and somehow fill that enormous void left by De Bruyne. I mean, someone like Phil Foden, he has to step up regardless of whether, regardless of De Bruyne's exit. But other younger players then, maybe like Claudio Echeverri, will hope to get more game time and break into Guardiola's team next season. So, what are your thoughts on how City should actually go about replacing De Bruyne, and how does City replace someone so influential?
You don't. Guardiola said once about Aguero, like, no, we cannot replace him. I think of all the players that have left, I think De Bruyne is easily the most unique. He's not left yet; he's about to, of course. Who with David Silva? You had obviously, he's the most technically gifted footballer I've seen at Manchester City. Is David Silva in terms of like his composure and his elegance, a balletic footballer. But then he was a 10 out of 10 playmaker. Gundogan was there as a 9 out of 10 playmaker who could control the game with deft touches and beautiful, intricate periods of play as well. He was a really natural replacement. Yaya Touré's replacement was Kevin De Bruyne, I would argue, in terms of, I don't think Kevin De Bruyne, it was just as bombastic but more consistent than Yaya. So you got him. Vincent Kompany left, and essentially Vincent Kompany was a brilliant powerhouse, natural leader centre back. There's quite a few, powerhouse centre backs around, and they got Ruben Diaz and it worked well. I don't see anyone in world football, and I've not seen anyone in world football for the past 10 years that has anything close to the vision, the ball carrying, the goal scoring, the variety of passes, and the consistency of Kevin De Bruyne. I don't think there's anyone in the world that can do 70% of what De Bruyne can do. And that sounds I like hyperbole, but I truly believe he is one of one that way. So all you do is just try and buy the next best thing, someone who can create in a high volume. It'll be a very different take, and it won't be as good. But maybe you don't have to be as good to be as successful, It feels like, there's a lot of talk of the era of superstars slowly fading. But I think the thing is what you accept is that when there's someone like, De Bruyne, and I actually going to say someone like Messi or someone like, an Iniesta, those players just do not come around very often. And I really do put them in that category. They are uniquely skilled players that you just accept that you can't replace and you just move on and you get someone else who's really good. And I've essentially in my head, what I'm trying to say is I expect and accept a dip, in terms of quality because We've seen it. We've seen the result of it. We've got some very talented attacking midfielders already. And the Foden's had a poor season, admittedly, but I just don't think anyone's going to come close to that. Florian Wirtz, I mean, he's the ideal signing if you can get him. A high volume creator and goal scorer, not as uniquely brilliant as De Bruyne, but still very young and very talented. I don't know if he'll come. I don't know if he wants a Manchester City move, but I would love to see City, splash some cash on him. You could go bold and go for Ryan Shirky, someone like that who's having a cracking season. Not sure he'll work as hard, but majestically talented. I don't know. Big fan of Bayana. Villarreal. He looks like a very unique player. Not as good a goal scorer as De Bruyne, but a great passer. Got that same sort of direct and no hesitation approach of De Bruyne in terms of looking for a pass, but still not as good. I don't really know. You could go for a bunch of options, or you could lean on Foden with a rejuvenated and hopefully back to fitness Rodri behind him. Maybe Oscar Bob or Marmoush start to play a bit more central. They're not De Bruyne, but maybe you don't have to be, if other people step up. So I don't know what the options are really. Echeverri could get a chance. We've got a young lad in the academy called Mikasa, who's brilliant, Divin Mikasa. He could start to, show his worth in pre-season or so on the Club World Cup. Essentially, I don't think someone like Eze is. I don't think he's capable. I just don't think he's capable of stepping up to Manchester City's levels. I might be wrong there. Essentially, I think I just accept that, whatever it is, we have to sort of play a different way. I think previously it was give the ball to De Bruyne and let him do what he can. Hopefully, Rodri comes back. There's an element of brilliance there from Rodri for what it's worth. A touch of De Bruyne in terms of his long range goals and so on, his vision. But if he comes back and then the wingers start to step up a little bit with Haaland there, you don't have to have De Bruyne to be the best team in the league. It just makes it easier. So we'll see.
Yeah, and what you're hoping for now from De Bruyne in these final few games? Of course, the perfect send off would be to for him to lift some kind of silverware, whether it's the FA Cup or the Club World Cup, or ideally both, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean that would the perfect send off. Is him holding a trophy. I mean the Club World Cup would be incredible. The first ever, of this new style. If you somehow manage to win that, that would be a brilliant end to the legacy. And I think he would. I think he'd love that. Actually, I think he'd be very happy if he stays. We don't even know. I presume
Mm.
he will do, but his contract ends in June, so he might not be there. But I think they'll probably do some slight extension. But you might just fancy, walking off into the sunset after the FA Cup if we get to the final. It could whimper out into nothing, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, a bit of silverware. It would be very fitting if his last game in a Manchester City shirt was him holding a trophy. It'd be beautiful. Football doesn't tend to write fairy tales because it's the real world, but they're possible. And KDB is the kind of guy who makes that stuff possible because he's that special. I want one bit of magic to remember him. Basically, I want to see one game where it'd be great if he scored a winner in a final. That'd be just be after that, it'd be like done. That we can't ask for much more than that. Yeah, another De Bruyne masterclass. Him to secure us in the Champions League for next season, an FA Cup or something like that. I don't think we'll win the Club World Cup. I don't know. Who knows? We might sign a bunch of players before then. It all changes. Who knows? But if he's involved, yeah, him sending us off with that would be special.